Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Clinical Pearl series for the 2025 to 2026 residency year. My name is Clifford Chen, and I am the PGY2 Oncology resident at Monument Health. Today, I'll be presenting on Ziftomenib, brand name Komzifti. This is a relatively new drug that is indicated for relapsed refractory acute myeloid leukemia with a susceptible nucleophosmin 1 mutation. The NPM1 mutations are among the most common genetic mutations found in up to 30% of newly diagnosed AML cases. Cure Oncology is the manufacturer of this new drug and sponsor of the Komen-001 trial that got this drug accelerated approval by the FDA on November 14, 2025. The way that this medication works is that it disrupts the interaction and formation of the menin and lysine K specific methyltransferase 2A complex to stop the proliferation by leukemic cancer cells from a downstream reduction effect. It is an oral medication that is taken 600 milligrams daily until disease progression or unacceptable toxicity. However, if disease progression or toxicity is not known to be debilitating, then the patient can be treated for another 6 months for clinical response. Some common side effects to be aware of are infections, hemorrhage, and diarrhea. Patients should also be aware of differentiation syndrome since this is a black box warning. And it's good to counsel patients on these side effects when they're starting this medication for the first time. While Ziftomenib has low emetic potential, there are drug-drug interactions to be mindful of because they can impact the efficacy and safety of this medication. Notably, proton pump inhibitors and H2RAs can decrease the concentration of the medication. But if co-administration is unavoidable because the patient has to take it for GERD, then it's recommended to space out administration times. With strong or moderate CYP3A4 inducers like carbamazepine, they can drastically decrease the concentration of this drug, while strong CYP3A4 inhibitors like fluconazole and apixaban can increase the concentration of Ziftomenib, which in turn increases the risk of toxicities. With QT prolonging drugs, they're also recommended to be avoided due to the medication's association with having some risk of QT prolongation. This is really more of concern in patients with higher QT intervals at baseline. So it would be okay to give medications like ondansetron or palinositron as needed for nausea vomiting or as a pre-medication if the patient were to need additional emetic support. If the patient does experience debilitating adverse events, then this can be addressed by dose reducing at intervals of 200 milligrams. But if the patient still cannot tolerate 200 milligrams daily, then it is recommended to permanently discontinue this medication. Based on the results of the COMET-001 trial, Ziftomenib at this time is only recommended for relapsed refractory disease in patients who have the NPM1 mutation for AML. Now to dive into the COMET-001 trial, this is a phase 1 to 2 open-label multi-center, multi-cohort trial that initially examined the molecular subtype and dose with the best response for treating AML. In the COMET-001 trial, they enrolled patients who were at least 18 years of age, had good performance status, and those who either failed or are ineligible for any other approved standard of care treatments, including transplant. To prevent confounding the results, they excluded patients who had conditions that would cause them to potentially have lower life expectancies, such as those who have clinically active CNS leukemia and those with more severe graft versus host disease. The patients who participated in the COMET-001 trial are pretty representative of patients with relapsed refractory AML and this is also pretty applicable to patients who are treated at Monument Health's Cancer Care Institute. Specifically, majority of patients were enrolled from the United States and other Western countries, were of European descent, and median age was 69. These patients also had a median number of 2 previous regimens, and majority were also treated with venetoclax in the past. What they end up finding in this trial is that the overall response rate was 35%, and there were 25% of participants who had complete remission with full or partial hematologic recovery. For median duration, they found that the composite complete remission was around 5 months, and those who had complete remission with full or partial hematologic recovery was around 3.7 months. For patients who experienced adverse events in the COMET-001 trial, 40% of them did experience at least a grade 3 adverse event, in which a majority were due to infections. Infections also did make up a plurality of patients who had to permanently discontinue the medication. Then, when it came to grade 5 events, 2 of them were due to differentiation syndrome, which is why differentiation syndrome is a box warning for this medication. And then the remaining cases were due to infection and sudden death. Now, for strengths and limitations of this trial, like I said previously, the baseline characteristics of these participants are pretty representative of patients that have relapsed refractory AML. They're also very applicable to patients at Monument Health. They also did do a good job at separating patients by type of mutation to further illustrate which patients would best benefit from this medication. So that's how they ended up finding that patients with NPM1 mutation at a dose of 600 milligrams would benefit the most from it. But since this was not a phase 3 trial, there is no direct comparisons to other recommended treatments. So it's really difficult to say how efficacious this drug can really be. And there's also a low sample size. Despite the lack of direct comparisons to other standard of care therapies in the COMET-001 trial, there are ongoing clinical trials looking to examine the utility of Ziftomenib in adult and pediatric populations with acute leukemia, as shown on this slide. They're also looking to examine if Ziftomenib could be used as maintenance therapy after allogeneic transplant, and if this drug could be used for advanced gastrointestinal stromal tumors after a patient fails imatinib. Here are my references for this clinical presentation. I hope you all enjoy learning about Ziftomenib for relapsed or refractory acute myeloid leukemia in patients who have NPM1 mutation. If you have any questions about any of the contents in this presentation or want to learn more, feel free to reach out to me at cchen1@monument.health. Thank you, and I hope you have a great day.